When my newborn son was rushed to the NICU just minutes after birth, I was told it was a precaution, just until he stabilizes, they said. I wanted to believe them. I wanted to trust that the sterile halls of the hospital were filled with people who cared, who told the truth. But nothing could have prepared me for what I saw on my third visit to the NICU. His tiny body, normally surrounded by blinking machines and soft beeping sounds, was lying too still. And for the first time, there was no heart monitor. No wires. Nothing. I looked around, panic rising like a tide in my chest, and when I finally caught the doctor's eye and asked why, he looked away. He didn't speak. He didn't move. Just looked away. From that moment on, I knew something was very wrong. And whatever it was, they were hiding it from me. This is the story of what they didn't want me to find out, and what I had to risk to uncover the truth about my own baby. The delivery room was brighter than I expected. Clinical, almost cold. But when I heard my baby cry, that thin, high-pitched sound that split my chest open, everything else disappeared. For 1 second, I thought it was over. The fear, the pain, the months of uncertainty. But then the nurses moved faster than they should have. One of them took him from my arms almost immediately. He just needs a little help breathing, the nurse said gently, avoiding my eyes. We're taking him to the NICU for observation. My husband, Matthew, squeezed my hand, but I could feel he was scared too. I told myself not to overthink. Newborns go to the NICU all the time. But there was something rushed in their movements. Like they were trying to stay calm on the outside, but inside, they were already sounding alarms. I was allowed to see him 4 hours later. The NICU had this hushed, eerie atmosphere, like the walls were made of secrets. Machines blinked quietly. Wires everywhere. I found my baby swaddled tightly, his chest rising and falling with mechanical precision. A heart monitor was clipped to his tiny foot, a nasal cannula helped him breathe. He looked so small, like he wasn't ready for the world. But he was alive. That was enough. The next day, I came back early, before visiting hours technically began. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face. When I entered the NICU, something felt off. The nurse at the front desk gave me a forced smile, like she recognized me but didn't want to. When I reached his station, I stopped breathing. There was no monitor, no wires, no beeping. My baby was lying still in his little bassinet, no machines around him. His chest was moving, barely. But something was wrong. My whole body knew it before my mind caught up. Where's his monitor? I asked, too loud. One of the doctors, a tall man with silver-rimmed glasses, was checking a clipboard near the corner. He turned when I spoke. Our eyes met, and then he looked away, not like he was busy. Not like he didn't hear me. He looked away. That second, that exact second, something inside me cracked. I stepped closer, my voice trembling now. Excuse me. Why isn't he on the monitor anymore? What's going on? He mumbled something I couldn't catch. Then he walked off. Just walked away. I stood there, frozen, watching the back of the man who was supposed to save my son. I didn't know if I should scream or cry or run after him. So I did none of it. I just stared at my baby and counted his breaths, one by one, terrified that one of them would be the last. That night, I didn't leave the hospital, and around 2 a.m., when most of the floor was quiet, I overheard 2 nurses whispering near the break room. One of them said my last name, and the other one said something I will never forget. They should have told her already. I didn't breathe. I stood just beyond the vending machine, in the hallway outside the NICU break room, clutching a cold bottle of water I hadn't even realized I'd bought. My ears were burning. My heart pounded like it knew what I was about to hear. They should have told her already, the nurse said again, her voice hushed but heavy. She's been here every day, the other replied, almost whispering. You'd think someone would have sat her down by now. I leaned closer, not daring to move too fast. My name, had been in their mouths. My baby. My son. What were they not telling me? Dr. Halvorsen said to wait until they had confirmation. The first nurse replied. But honestly, I think it's cruel at this point. Confirmation of what? They started moving, so I ducked back around the corner and pretended to read the notice board. My hands were shaking. When they passed me, I smiled weakly. They nodded, their expressions instantly neutral, too neutral. Like they knew I'd heard them but were trained not to react. I didn't go back to the NICU that night. I sat in the dimly lit family room, alone, trying to piece together a puzzle I didn't even know I had. Why wasn't he on the monitor? Why had the doctor looked away? And what the hell were they talking about? Confirmation of what? The next morning, I asked to speak to Dr. Halvorsen directly. The nurse at the desk said he wasn't in yet. I waited 3 hours. When he finally arrived, he was already surrounded by 2 interns and a clipboard full of rounds. I stepped in front of him before he could pass. I need answers, I said, my voice low but firm. Something is going on, and I need you to stop walking away from me. He glanced at his team, clearly uncomfortable. Let's talk privately, he said. We sat in a small office behind the NICU. He closed the door. I braced myself. Your son's condition is complicated, he began. I want the truth, I interrupted. All of it. No more delays. He hesitated, then finally said the words that changed everything. We suspect he experienced a prolonged period without oxygen during delivery. The scans suggest some areas of the brain may have been affected. We're still evaluating the extent of the damage. I didn't even feel the floor under my feet. Just a rush of blood in my ears and something cold spreading through my chest. You suspect brain damage? I whispered. And you didn't think I deserved to know that? He looked tired, suddenly older. We didn't want to alarm you without being certain. We needed to wait for the MRI results. I stood up. You let me sit there for days thinking he was getting better. You let me believe it was just a breathing issue. And all this time, you knew there was a chance he'd never be okay. He didn't answer. And I didn't want to hear any more from him. I stormed out of the office and made my way to my son's station. This time, there was a monitor beside him again, but I didn't care. I picked him up, wires and all, and held him against my chest. He didn't cry. Just made a soft noise like he was dreaming. I stayed like that for hours. Later that evening, Matthew arrived. I told him everything. He listened, silent, eyes dark with something deeper than shock. When I finished, he said only one thing: I'm calling my cousin. She's a lawyer. That's when I realized, if they were hiding this, what else weren't they telling us? The next morning, I found something folded behind his chart at the foot of the bed. A form I wasn't meant to see. It was dated the day he was born, and it said resuscitation required, 5 minutes without oxygen. But no one had told me, and no one had told me anything. 5 minutes. I kept repeating that number in my head as if saying it over and over might change what it meant. 5 minutes without oxygen. 5 minutes where my baby was fighting to live and I was lying in a hospital bed, completely unaware. 5 minutes that could mean a lifetime of consequences. I sat in the stiff NICU chair, holding the folded form in my hands. It was creased, hidden behind layers of routine paperwork like someone had deliberately buried it. The signature at the bottom belonged to a nurse I'd never met. And under notes, scribbled in tight handwriting, were the words "No heartbeat detected for approximate 5 minutes, resuscitation successful." Successful. What a word. Clinical. Cold. As if bringing a baby back from the edge of death was just another box to check off. But no one had told me. Not the nurse who handed him to me. Not the doctor who looked away. Not even Dr. Halvorsen in that little office where I begged for the truth. I couldn't stop shaking. I took a photo of the form with my phone, emailed it to myself, then slipped it into my purse. I didn't know what else to do. I wasn't sure who I could trust. But I knew one thing for certain: someone had made the decision not to tell me. Someone thought I couldn't handle it. Or worse, that I didn't need to know. Matthew was already waiting in the hospital cafe when I showed him the form. His face went pale. He kept reading the same line over and over. "They knew," he whispered. "They've known since day one." His cousin, Naomi, the lawyer, had agreed to meet us that night. She wasn't a medical malpractice expert, but she had contacts. She told us not to confront the staff directly anymore. To stop asking questions. To document everything. "Don't let them know you're suspicious," she warned. Hospitals close ranks fast. If they sense a lawsuit, they'll start scrubbing records. I felt sick. My baby was fighting for every breath, and now I had to fight on two fronts, for his life and for the truth. The next day, I came in earlier than usual. The nurse on shift was someone new, younger than the others, with tired eyes and a nervous energy. I watched her carefully. When she stepped away from the monitors to update a chart, I approached slowly. "I have a question," I said gently, "and I really need you to be honest." She looked up, startled. "Of course. My son. Was he ever without a heartbeat? After he was born?" She froze. For just a second. But it was enough. I wasn't on duty that day," she said quickly. "But I'm sure the doctors would have told you if they didn't." She blinked. Her mouth opened like she wanted to say more, but something stopped her. She looked around then. She leaned in and whispered, "You should request the full birth report from records. Not the summary. The full report. It'll be under Code Blue protocols." Before I could ask anything else, she stood upright and walked away. That afternoon, I followed her advice. I went to the hospital's records department and filled out the request form. The clerk behind the counter raised an eyebrow when she saw the code I'd written, but she didn't say a word. She told me it would be ready by morning. I didn't sleep that night. I held my son in the NICU until they asked me to leave. I kept staring at him, wondering what he'd felt in those 5 minutes. If he had felt anything at all. Wondering if he remembered the darkness, the silence, the way his body must have struggled. The next morning, I returned to records first thing. There was a sealed envelope with my name on it. I tore it open right there in the hallway, flipping through the dense medical language until I found it. Page 7. Maternal not informed of Code Blue during delivery. And then the final line: physician decision. Withhold details due to risk of emotional distress interfering with maternal infant bonding. They made that choice for me. They decided I didn't deserve to know the truth about my own child, because it might upset me. It's when I knew. This wasn't just medical negligence, this was control. This was deception, and I was going to expose every single person involved. Sat in my car, the envelope open on the passenger seat, the full report spread out across my lap. My fingers were gripping the edges so tightly the paper was starting to crumple. Withhold details due to risk of emotional distress interfering with maternal-infant bonding. That sentence rang in my head like an alarm I couldn't silence. They made me. The danger. They decided I couldn't handle the truth, that knowing my baby had flatlined for 5 minutes would damage how I looked at him. They acted like I was fragile, like I was a threat to my own child's healing process. But I was the one sitting next to his crib every day. I was the one watching the rise and fall of his chest like it was my only purpose in the world. They didn't protect me, they silenced me, and that silence, I realized, wasn't just about comfort. It was about liability. When I showed the report to Naomi, she read it once, twice, then pushed it across the table toward me like it was something toxic. "This changes everything," she said. "This is institutional policy. This isn't just a rogue doctor. This was signed off by hospital administration. They've documented their decision to hide a life-threatening event from the patient." My stomach turned. "So, what happens now?" "We file a request for internal documentation," she said. "Emails, meeting notes, any communication regarding the birth. We need to find out who decided to keep you in the dark. And more importantly, why. I nodded, but something still didn't sit right with me. Hiding the code blue was horrible. Yes. But the way that doctor looked away, that haunting look, it wasn't just guilt. It was fear. There was still more I didn't know. Later that week, I requested to speak with one of the nurses who'd been on duty during my delivery. Her name was Angela. I remembered her face. She was the one who whispered just a little. Breathing trouble as they wheeled my son away, she agreed to meet me in the chapel room, one of the only places in the hospital without cameras. Naomi said it was better to keep everything informal for now. No recordings. Just listen. Angela arrived in plain clothes, her ID badge tucked away. She looked exhausted, like someone who had been carrying a secret too long. I only have a few minutes, she said. And if anyone asks, this meeting didn't happen. I showed her the report. Her eyes barely scanned it before she sighed. I remember everything, she said softly. They paged a code blue less than a minute after your baby was delivered. No heartbeat. No breathing. They started compressions immediately. It took 5 minutes before they got a response. 5 full minutes. Why didn't anyone tell me? I asked, my voice breaking. She looked down at her hands. Because you weren't supposed to know. Dr. Halvorsen made that call before they even stabilized him. He said the damage was likely irreversible. That if you knew, you'd panic, and that panic would interfere with the hospital's ability to manage you as a patient. Manage me, that's the word she used, not help. Not support. Manage. Angela looked up. But that's not the worst part. I froze. What do you mean? She hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out a folded sticky note. I don't have access to official files. But I saw something on the internal message board. It was taken down a few hours later. It mentioned your baby's name. And something called Trial Protocol 9A. My heart stopped. What's that? I don't know, she whispered. But if your son was enrolled in a protocol without your consent, she didn't finish the sentence, she didn't have to. As soon as she left, I texted Naomi. She responded immediately, find out everything you can about that trial. Protocol 9A. If they experimented on your son without consent, that's criminal. That night, I stayed up searching every medical research database I could access. But Trial Protocol 9A brought up nothing. No papers. No studies. No published results. It was like it didn't exist, until I found a link buried in a medical ethics forum, posted anonymously, dated 8 months ago. It wasn't a paper. It was a whistleblower complaint. Title: Unauthorized Use of Experimental Resuscitation Protocols on Neonates at Redacted Medical Center. The body of the post was short. It mentioned one thing: Protocol 9A, high-risk trial, not approved by the FDA, used only on non-consenting patients under emergency exemption status, and then, at the very bottom, a single question: how many of these babies were ever meant to survive? The words on that whistleblower post blurred as I stared at the screen. How many of these babies were ever meant to survive? It wasn't just a question. It was an accusation. A threat. A wound someone had tried to bury. And now it had a name. Protocol 9A. I couldn't sleep. Couldn't think. I sat beside my son in the NICU, the monitors softly beeping as if nothing was wrong, as if everything was fine. But I knew. I knew. Someone had decided he would be a part of something, an experiment, without my consent, without even informing me of the risk. And now they were hiding it. Burying it under charts, code names, and signed-off silence. I watched his chest rise and fall. Each breath a small miracle. Each blink of his eyes a question I couldn't yet answer. Was this why they kept the heart monitor off? To see how long he could last on his own? Was this why Dr. Halvorsen had looked away? Because he knew this wasn't just medical negligence, it was something worse. I sent the whistleblower post to Naomi. She called within minutes. You need to get out of that hospital, she said. Her voice firm. Don't wait for confrontation. We'll go legal. But right now, I want you safe. And I want your son out of their hands. I felt the weight of that decision. Walking out would mean making enemies. It would mean pushing back. Against people with power, people who'd already proven they had no problem rewriting the truth. But I also knew I couldn't leave my baby in a place that had treated him like data instead of a human life, so I did what I never thought I'd do. I took him to not illegally. I demanded a discharge under my parental rights. They fought it, of course. Said he wasn't stable enough, that home care would be a risk. But I'd done my homework. I had Naomi backing me. I had a private pediatrician lined up, willing to supervise his transition out of the NICU. And most importantly, I had proof that this hospital had no moral ground to stand on. They finally relented, but not without cold stares and silent judgment. One of the administrators handed me the paperwork without looking me in the eye. I held my son tight in the sling across my chest as I walked past the station for the last time. No one said goodbye. That same evening, Naomi filed a formal complaint with the state medical board. We included everything: the form they hid, the full birth report, the recording of the conversation with Angela, and the link to the whistleblower post. We knew it was only the beginning. Hospitals like this don't fall easily. But they do crack, and all I needed was a crack. The investigation opened within 2 weeks. Meanwhile, my son was home. Fragile, yes. Still on supplemental oxygen, still needing physical therapy and developmental monitoring. But home. In my arms. And for the first time since the day he was born, I didn't feel powerless. I felt like a mother. Months passed. Then, one morning, I received an envelope. No return address. Inside was a flash drive and a single note that read, "You weren't the only one." Footage on the drive was from a security camera inside a hospital conference room. A group of doctors sat around a table. I recognized 2 of them, including Dr. Halvorsen. They were discussing trial outcomes. There was no urgency, no remorse. One of them even laughed. "This one lasted 6 minutes," he said, tapping a file. "Pretty sure that's a record for 9A. The others chuckled. I paused the video. My hands were shaking too hard to keep going. I didn't need to watch the rest to know what it meant. Why son had been treated like a statistic. A number on a list. A subject in a study I never agreed to. And now, I had proof. This story is not over. I don't know who sent me that footage. I don't know how many other parents are still in the dark. But I do know this: I'm going to find them. I'm going to tell every parent who ever walked out of that NICU with a blank space in their heart and no explanation why, and together, we're going to make sure these people never get to hide behind silence again.